Today we're going to be replacing the CV axle and the wheel bearing on a 2009 Nissan Altima 2.5 liter CVT. So we're going to be doing both sides, but we're having noise in our wheel bearing, and we also have our CV axle that has a torn boot, which is right back in here. So the first thing you're going to have to do, obviously, is take your wheel off, jack up your car, make sure you block it, and then we're going to take off this plastic shroud, which is just some clips. We're going to pry these clips to release them, like so, and then this plastic shroud will come right out. So we'll be right back, and as soon as I get this off, and then we'll continue. Okay, so the tools you need to do this job: you're going to need a pair of pliers, needle nose, a flat tip screwdriver, small hammer, a big hammer. You're going to need a couple of ratchets. You're going to need a breaker bar. You may need some extensions. This is probably the tool you want to get if you don't have one. An electric impact wrench. If you have an air impact wrench, great, but this is like $39, real cheap. Then you need some sockets. You'll need a 32 socket for the axle nut. You're going to need a 22 also for the brakes. You're going to need two 21s. So I have this 21 and this 21, and this is for the strut. You're going to need 17 for the, if you're doing the wheel bearing. This takes off the bolts for the wheel bearing, 17 millimeter. This 10 millimeter is for the ABS sensor. And if you're doing the passenger side, you're going to need a 13 millimeter for the clamp that holds the CV axle in place on that side. And you'll also need a jack stand, a jack, maybe a light, and obviously your parts. If you gather all those tools up at the beginning, it'll go a lot quicker as you're doing the job. So now we have this plastic piece off, and we'll be able to get access to our CV axle, and here you can see the boot is disconnected here. And but basically, if you try to get this job done at a mechanic, the labor for it here is about $380 to replace the axle, and $380 to replace the wheel bearing. I suppose they may combine it for you, but you're still looking at a lot of money to do this job. And it's not very difficult. You just need a few tools and about an hour to do the job. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to disconnect the brake here, and there's two bolts back here that hold it on. So we're going to take these two off, and then we're going to bungee this up out of the way while we're working on it. So the next step is we're going to take this off real quick. Okay, so now you need a 22 millimeter socket, and we're going to take this bolt off for the brakes. Now you're probably going to need a breaker bar or something, because this is going to be on pretty tight. So I've already broken it loose with my breaker bar, and now I'm going to take this off. Wrench. So we have this bolt, and then we have another one down here, right here, that you have to take out. So you take both of these out, and once you get them out, we're gonna use something to tie this up here to get it out of the way. So I'll be right back after I get these bolts out, and we'll continue with the next step. So now we're going to take, I have a bucket here and I just rested the brakes on there, and I'm going to take this pin out right here. It just slides out with a screwdriver like that. And then I'm going to take these speed sensors out so that it'll loosen this wire so we don't pull on it. And then I'm going to take this ABS sensor out right here. And then I'm going to secure that up here so it's out of the way. Okay, so to get these speed sensors out, you just slide them right out like that. This is a 10mm bolt, so it's not very tight on there. Loosen this up, and this just slides right out just like that. I'm going to set that off to the side. Don't want to lose the bolt. Okay, so now I'm going to fasten this up here, and we'll be ready to disconnect this hub from the strut here. Okay, so now we're going to loosen up this axle nut. We got to take this cotter pin out. So what you got to do is you got to bend this cotter pin so it's straight, and then just pull it out just like that. Set it off to the side, and this is going to be a 32mm. Grab my 32mm. Yep. So this is going to be a 32mm. Alright, so this is going to be a 32mm, and you can try to use a breaker bar. It's even better if you have an impact wrench to get this out. Now we're going to take this, we're going to loosen this up, and then we're going to take these two bolts off that's holding this buckle on, and these are 21mm, so you're going to need a wrench for here and one for here, and just break those loose. So first we're going to take this off, and we're going to loosen that up real quick, and then we'll move on to the next step. Alright, that's good. So now we're going to loosen this axle from the wheel bearing. And what we did was we put the axle nut back on here so it was flush, and then we're going to take big heavy hammer, and we're going to hit it through here so it loosens it up. And it was actually that loose. So you see it's already loosened up, and we're good to go. So now we're going to take off these bolts, and that will allow this to be free, and we can push this out the rest of the way and then take off this wheel bearing assembly. Okay, so now we got these two bolts out from here, so we're just going to slide this, and it's going to tilt out. Now we should be able to get this CB axle out of here, and then there's four bolts on the back holding this wheel bearing assembly in place. They're back here. You can feel them with your fingers. You might not be able to see them, but they're back here. There's one here, There's one over there, and then there's two on the bottom. So yeah, right here. So we're going to take those out, and then we're going to use our mallet, and then we're going to hammer this out once we get those taken out. Okay, so now you can see back here we have the bolts loosened. I used a 17mm socket, and it's really easy if you have an impact wrench. This is a very cheap impact wrench for like $39 at Harbor Freight. But anyway, you can use this is an electric impact wrench, so you don't even need air. You just put it in there, and then you can take these out real easy. But for this one on the far left, it's really hard to get to, so you just put your socket on here first, like that, and then you move it in a different position so that you can get your impact wrench on it, and then you can just take it out. So I've gotten these loosened up, so now I'm going to take them out the rest of the way, and then we will be able to get this bearing out. So we got 4 of these. And the last one. Now to get this bearing out, we're gonna, I don't know how hard it's gonna be, but we're gonna tap it with our mallet right here, like this. Try to loosen it up, and it'll pop out eventually. So I'm going to loosen it up and then get it out, and then I'll show you the new one. Okay, so we got the wheel bearing out. Now you're probably going to have to put these two bolts back in, so you have some stability when you're trying to beat this out. But it was in like this. I took my hammer and I hit it here and here about 20 times or so, and then it just dropped right out. So when you take it out, you're going to notice that you have these slots for the ABS sensor. So when you put your new one back in, just make sure you have it aligned the same way when you're putting it back in, right? So this is the new one. It's a Timken wheel bearing that I got on Amazon. It's a very nice product. And I'll put the price of the product on the bottom of the screen. But very nice wheel bearing. So when we put this in, we're going to put it the same way we took out that one, with these two slots up here, so that you have a space for your ABS sensor. So we're just going to put it in just like that. We're going to put the bolts back in, and then we'll start taking out that CB axle. Okay, so we got the new wheel bearing assembly in, and don't forget to put it on this little shroud here first. Just see how it goes in like that, and then just test your ABS sensor, make sure it goes in. If it does, you're all set. So now we're going to take off the CB axle, and to do that, there are 2 bolts back there. See if we can point them out. Right here, and another one up here. So we're going to take those 2 out with there's one here, and then there's another one right on top here, right there. So we're going to take those 2 out with an extension, and I think they're 13mm. but I'll check in just a second. And we'll take it out and then we'll show you what's next. So when you take those 2 bolts in the back, there's this bracket that sits like this. It holds the axle or locks it into place. So just make sure that when you take these out, you don't lose track of this, because you're going to need to put this back on just like that, and then put the bolts back in. So the next step is to pull this out. Okay, so I just pulled on it a little bit and actually it just came right out. It wasn't stuck at all. So sometimes they get stuck in there, but you got to be very careful when you're taking it out so that you don't mess up the seal that's there. So gently take it out, and you're gonna have some, you want to make sure you have a drain pan underneath the car, because you could have some fluid leak. So you want to keep track of how much fluid came out so you can put the same amount back in. So we have this out, and now I'm gonna go get the new one, and then we'll compare these side by side. Okay, so here we have the new axle side by side with the old one. Here we can see that the boot is separated, and it's looks the same as the original one. Now you can keep the original one and get it rebuilt, and then the next time you need to change it out, you can put the original back in, and it'll be just like factory. So you don't want to throw these away, because you can get them rebuilt for cheaper, usually cheaper than you can buy them for. But this is a DTA drive axle. They seem to have pretty good reviews on Amazon, so we're going to give it a shot. I'll put the details, the price and everything in this below on the screen, so you can see how much it costs. But it looks like a good part. Looks pretty quality built. Okay, so we've got it seated back in there, and now we're going to sure we have it all the way in. Now, next we're going to put the bracket back on, and the 2 bolts that go right here, and we'll be ready to put everything back together. Okay, so we've got this bracket back into place, and this is going to lock the axle so that it doesn't come out. And we got the 2 bolts back in. Tighten them down. Tighten down this other side. And this is going into aluminum here, so you don't want to tighten them too tight. You just want to snug them up a little bit. So I'm going to 13 millimeter. Let me see. Yep, it's 13 millimeter. So I'm gonna snug these up. Not, like I said, not too tight because they're just aluminum there. And once I get those snugged up, we'll be ready to put it all back together. Alright. Okay, so we got the axle back into the hub. We just put this back into place. And it actually comes, this is the old axle nut. This is the new one. It actually looks really good. So we're going to use this new one because it has a flange on it already. And all we have to do is put this on here. So with the axle, they included the new cotter pin and a crown for the nut, like that. So this is a pretty good axle, and they provide everything that you need. Looks really good. So I'm going to tighten this up real quick, and then we're going to put it back together and we're going to see how it goes. Okay, so we got the cotter pin in and the axle nut on, so now we need to put everything back together. So we're going to put in these speed sensors here and here. Then we're going to reinstall the ABS sensor here. This is a 10 millimeter bolt. Goes right in there. We're going to snug that up. We're going to reattach these bolts for the strut here. You just have to wiggle it a little bit to get it into place. This one. That. Okay, so we're going to tighten these up, and then we're going to reattach. We're going to put the rotor back on and reattach the brakes. Okay, so we got these bolts for the strut back into place. We tightened up the ABS sensor, and now we're going to put the rotor back on, and we're going to reattach the brake line. So and this we're going to put this back on, and then this clip is going to go just like that into place, locking it into place. So I'm going to put this caliper back on, and then the brake line, and we'll be pretty much ready to test it. We just had to add a little bit of transmission fluid back in because we lost a little bit when we took the CV axle out. So we replaced that and put the tire back on, and we'll be ready to go, ready to roll. Okay, so we got the brake back on. tighten these up. Now we're going to put this brake line back on. Just you put the hose through and then guide it through like this, and then it's time for the clip. You just slide it in there like that. Got the clip back on. Now we're going to put the wheel back on and we'll be ready to go. So it's not a difficult job. It's definitely something you can do yourself. If you take your car to the dealer, he's going to charge you about $500 for the wheel bearing and about $800 for the axle. So, you know, that's quite a bit of money. As you saw, the price for the axle and the wheel bearing is very little money. So if you have about an hour and a half of time, you have some tools, and if you don't have tools, like I said, you can go to Harbor Freight. You can get a really cheap impact wrench for like $39, and it'll make this job a whole lot easier. But it's definitely something you can do yourself. I was going to take it to a mechanic, and he told me $380 for the axle, $380 for the bearing for each side. So there was no way I was going to pay that price. So I decided to do it myself and make a video so you guys can see how to do it and save some money. So hopefully this helps you. Thanks, and see you guys next time.